Joining me on the podcast today with a look at how things are heating up is a friend of mine. I'm so excited for you to meet him. His name's Michael Duncan. He is a founding partner of a very successful firm in DC called Cavalry LLC. He is a digital media expert. He's worked on many high-profile and successful campaigns, including that of Senator Mitch McConnell, as well as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. And you also might recognize him because if you are a connoisseur of podcasts, as I am, he is a co-host of the Ruthless Podcast. They have new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. And Michael, welcome to Perino on Politics.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be great.
So I saw you guys with the Ruthless booth at the RNC, and they were outside on the square. I mean, you guys were super popular. I love seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, could you get better real estate than that right there on the plaza? Shows every single day. We had a blast, and everyone was in such a good mood. You know, Republicans united for a change, which was nice. Yeah, we just had
and it was right
time.
after the failed assassination attempt of President Trump. I mean, the mood was insane. The energy was great. The unity was amazing. And in some ways, Michael, I feel like that was 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do think that the unity of the Republicans is just as strong at the end of the RNC as it is today. But what has changed since then is that Joe Biden has pulled out of running for the campaign, and immediately the Democrats were like, should we have a primary? No, we're just going to go with Kamala Harris, and she is off and running on a sugar high honeymoon that the Democrats are quite enjoying right now. Let's get your take on where you think things are at this point, because the polls show we're still at pretty much a tie in the battleground states.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure that's a reflection of the strength of Kamala Harris or really the weakness of Joe Biden. Historically bad numbers for Joe Biden among younger voters and minority voters. They're going to come back to the fold of the Democratic Party. We probably would have seen a lot of that in September or October as you get closer to election day. But I think Kamala coming in, because so many of those Democratic primary voters didn't want Joe Biden to be the nominee, half in some polls, there's a snapback now amongst those cohorts of the electorate, the younger voters. And, I think, it's going to be a tied race. We should have anticipated this as a Republican. I did, certainly. But look, I mean, the polls might look better for Kamala Harris right now, but the research book is a lot thicker on her than it is on Joe Biden. That's for sure.
So one of the things I noticed in this chart that I look at, there's a Substack that Bruce Melman does. I recommend it to everyone. And on Sundays, he does a thing called 6 Chart Sundays. And he picks a theme and he runs you through 6 charts. And one of the charts he showed this week had 2 things. One was Harris closing the enthusiasm gap. That was something I really looked to make me understand what was happening in the election, because the enthusiasm for Republicans to vote for Trump was really high and enthusiasm for Democrats and Biden was very low. It is, according to this particular chart at this point, she kind of really shot up so that almost the enthusiasm is about the same. But also I wanted to ask you in particular about the fundraising. They say that they've raised over $200 million and they have a lot of small donors and first-time donors that might be younger people. And I know you pay a lot of attention to that. What do people need to know about the fundraising and enthusiasm gaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that is pent-up demand, right? It's a lot of those voters who really were disappointed that Joe Biden was going to run again, and they're coming off the sidelines for the first time. I mean, that being said, Donald Trump has the best small dollar fundraising in the game. So I anticipate he'll be able to keep up with whatever small dollar fundraising Kamala can do here. But I do expect, they're going to continue to have a couple of good weeks here ahead of the convention when she's formally, made the nominee. I don't think this is really going to settle out until after that convention, which really feels weird, with so much of the electorate kind of unfamiliar with Kamala Harris and her policies and everything. But that's sort of where we are. We're 100 days out from an election, and there's a lot of voters whose minds could change. That's for sure.
It's interesting because it does feel like Democrats feel, and a lot of them are saying, unburdened by having to pretend that Biden was the perfect candidate for them this year. He gave a weird speech last Wednesday night. We haven't had a podcast since last Wednesday night when the president addressed the nation. And Michael, I wanted to love the speech. I wanted to say, good for you, sir. Way to land on, way to stick the landing. And instead, he gave what was to me like a mini State of the Union speech. And then he said, oh, and also I'm going to do these 6 things before I leave office, including curing cancer and reforming the Supreme Court. Obviously, the cancer one is an important one to him, his moonshot that he wanted to do. But the reforming the Supreme Court, they got on that today. Mm-hmm. And this is a left-wing idea that they want to go after the court. Now, if the court was filled with progressives, you can be sure that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden would not be wanting to reform the Supreme Court. This, I think, is going to be something that the funders of Demand Justice and the Arabella network of advisors, right? These are the people, they have a lot of money. It goes to left-wing causes. There are money that comes into right-wing causes as well. But in this one in particular, I almost feel like Joe Biden was like, fine, okay, you're asking for a return on investment. I will go forward and do this op-ed and say we have to basically reform the entire Supreme Court. One of the things he's doing is saying, after 51 years in public service, I now believe that 18 years is the limit for Supreme Court justices. And I guess that starts now, Michael.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the State of the Union and how that speech in the Oval was sort of a mini State of the Union. He did the same thing back in that State of the Union, where he spent the middle of his speech doing a left-wing wish list, to all of these interest groups. It's donor management, right? Like you mentioned, Arabella Advisors is $1 billion enterprise that funds left-wing causes across the country. So I'm not really surprised by it. It is funny though that he rolls this out after he steps down. What I find very interesting about these power plays that the left wants to do to change institutions, whether that's like make DC a state, get rid of the Electoral College, pack the Supreme Court, all of these sort of things, is it's really situational ethics depending on where they are in the political game. I would bet that if Republicans take the United States Senate here in November, suddenly they're not going to want to end the filibuster anymore.
Right. And somebody that you used to work for, Mitch McConnell, warned them about this even before we ended up with the conservative justices that we have now.
Yeah, shout out to Harry Reid, who was Senate Majority Leader, a Democrat under Barack Obama, who blew up the Senate filibuster for judicial nominations and paved the way for Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump to fundamentally, transform the court with constitutionalist judges. It wouldn't have been possible without what Harry Reid did. So, they will regret it if they try.
Let me also ask you about this, Michael. What do you think about the branding of Kamala Harris as a San Francisco liberal? How does that land in your messaging expertise?
I think it'll be successful just because there's so much research to back it up. Her time, what's interesting is like her time in San Francisco, particularly when she was AG, wasn't as left-wing as the campaign she ran in 2019 for president of the United States. But the book is huge on everything from banning fracking, to limiting red meat consumption. There's tons of stuff that's really far off the left side of the map that we have to educate voters for. There's a ton of attacks, but it's going to require, I think, a consistent effort by Trump, super PACs, Senate candidates to educate people about her record. Because, that presidential campaign, you remember, they all got on that debate stage and raised their hand and said, we're going to decriminalize border crossings, free healthcare for illegal immigrants. That stuff is toxic with 70% of the electorate. The other thing I would note is that, while she's doing better with younger voters and African-American voters than Joe Biden was, the place where she struggled more than Joe Biden was with independent-leaning Republicans, suburban voters, a part of the electorate that Donald Trump has seen a lot of slippage with, since he came on the scene. And so that's also an opportunity, I think, to win back a lot of suburban voters, in places like Bucks County, Pennsylvania, Wayne County, Oakland County in Michigan. I mean, there's a lot to get there based on her record.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I found very creepy and upsetting last week was you had entities like Wikipedia trying to erase history. And in particular, the fact that in March of 2021, President Biden tasked his vice president with overseeing the border.
Mm-hmm.
Full stop. And she didn't really want, I think initially she was like, okay, great assignment. And then quickly realized this is an impossible situation and backed away from it. Then tried to say that it was only for root causes of the triangle countries. But you had Wikipedia doing that. You had news organizations going back and editing online their very headlines in which they called her a border czar. So what's going to win out here? Will the Republicans be able to make history, the real truth, stick? Or will they get away with saying that she was never put in charge of the border?
Oh, it's just wild stuff. I mean, Axios putting up a fact check that she was never border czar, and then people noted that Axios themselves called her a border czar. It really is like 1984 level stuff. The problem for Kamala Harris in the media is that all of this is on video. I mean, she ran for president in 2019, and she ran to the left of most of the other candidates. So, what are you going to believe, the media or your lying eyes? It really is a greatest hits catalog of everything on video, all of this stuff. So, I mean, I don't think the media's game is going to work, but they're certainly going to try.
And you saw how aggressively Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, defended her on Fox News yesterday, saying that's not true and it's the Republicans' fault because they wouldn't pass the legislation from the spring. I mean, I don't know. I'm waiting to see how the Trump campaign responds to all of this.
Yeah, I mean, the record of Biden's administration at the border is crystal clear. And I don't think any voter, whether you like Donald Trump or not, is confused on what Donald Trump would do on the border. So ultimately, it's going to be a contrast. Voters are going to look at the choice on border policy and immigration between what Donald Trump did when he was president and what this administration did when Joe Biden was president, and so it's not theoretical anymore. It's not like 2020 where Joe Biden was like, I'm just going to, unite the country. Now the records are there and they're crystal clear.
You can weigh them.
Right.
I see. Let me ask you this. There's a big story in the New York Times today, but they're not the only ones writing about it. And this is the idea that there is an increasing gender gap, especially between younger men and younger women when it comes to politics. And on the digital front, I've thought for many months that the Trump campaign's digital campaign was excellent. But it felt to me over the weekend, I was like, wow, is the Kamala Harris team catching up quickly?
I don't know. I don't know if this is a hype machine, sort of like the media's hype machine, or if it's that, or if it's a real thing. I mean, I certainly look at the polls and see that the gender gap exists. I mean, I think it's incumbent on the Trump campaign to get out there with, testimonials from real people, suburban moms, women impacted by, all of the Title IX stuff and the women's sports stuff, the Riley Gaineses of the world, people like that who can talk to this on terms where they're trusted, So I think that's incumbent on the Trump campaign. But there certainly is a gender gap.